Joining us now is Congressman Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat from Texas and a member of the House Ways and Means Committee, which is also investigating the president's finances. Brian Bender, defense editor for Politico, who broke that news story about Scotland, and Malcolm Nance, an MSNBC counterintelligence and intelligence analyst, along with Charlie Sykes, the editor-in-chief of The Bulwark and an MSNBC political analyst. I'm going to go to you first because this is your story, Brian. So what we're seeing here then is that the Trump administration do we know what the administration's role is, or if they had any role in this decision by the military to have their plane stop near a Trump golf resort and members of the military stay there?
We don't know exactly why this decision was made and whether this particular case that we uncovered, this new wrinkle about this Air Force crew staying at the resort in Scotland, is an isolated case or not. The House Oversight and Reform Committee believes that it's not. They've found data that suggests that millions of dollars have been spent in this way. And what we're trying to figure out, and the Air Force and the Pentagon have basically at this point declined to give us any information, nor have they given any of the documents that the House committee has requested about this. But the big question is, why would they go out of their way, break with tradition, if you will, on these very routine missions, in between the United States and the Middle East and elsewhere in the world, and drive 50-plus miles, park their plane at a commercial airport, not at an Air Force base, and spend what would seem to be much more government and taxpayer money than they normally would, just to stay at this resort owned by the president?
Well, sometimes maybe the information potentially answers the question. This is a little bit from your story with Natasha Bertrand. Taken together, these incidents raise the possibility that the military has helped keep Trump's Turnberry resort afloat. The property lost $4.5 million in 2017, but revenue went up $3 million in 2018. Brian, were you able to determine whether that increase in revenue, that sudden flushness of cash, had to do with basically government spending, military spending?
Well, what we do know is that this property in Scotland was struggling. And the House committee told us that they've been able to discern that, I think more than 600 payments were made, both to the nearby commercial airport and related payments to the hotel, over the course of several years. And so I think the big question for the House Oversight Committee is, was there some decision by some higher level person to spend this money there because the property was not doing well financially? And it looks like the property is doing better, and clearly that's in part because of potentially some of this government funding.
Malcolm Nance, you served in the military, honorably so. Have you ever heard of anything like this, about a military transport stopping at a private golf resort, let alone one owned by the President of the United States?
Surprisingly enough, yes, I have. And that was Saddam Hussein, who had a series of palaces all around his country. And he would only go to those palaces. He would never transport himself to some innocuous airport where he couldn't secure himself. Now, of course, that's an extreme example, right? Third world dictators and potentates tend to use these secure sites of which enrich themselves all the time. Now, for the United States, no. These flights are extremely unusual. I've flown every flight from the United States to every place in the Middle East at some point in my career. And when you go transatlantic, you make these three stops. You stop in Lakenheath, England, which is a ginormous military base that's south of Scotland. You stop in Ramstein Air Base in Kaiserslautern, Germany, or you stop in Rota, Spain, or some way station in between there, like Ankara, Turkey. But you don't stop at a small airport in Scotland or go to Shannon. The only time you go to Shannon is if there's an in-flight emergency. And all of these things do nothing but send money to the pocket of the President of the United States. Whoever the commander of that squadron is, he's going to be held accountable. And so will the Air Force and the Secretary of the Air Force and Mike Espy, Secretary of Defense, will have to explain, why is this money going to the president's pocket?
And let's see if they will be. I mean, Lloyd Doggett, Congressman Doggett, one other piece from this Political story. According to a letter the panel that the panel, these are the two committees, sent to the Pentagon in June, the military has spent $11 million on fuel at the Prestwick Airport, the closest airport to Trump Turnberry, since October of 2017. Fuel that would be cheaper if purchased at a U.S. military base. I'm old enough to remember when there was a huge scandal about the price of hammers and nails that the Pentagon was purchasing at really exorbitant prices, and toilet seats that were extra expensive because of who they were buying them from. This is now an additional amount of spending of U.S. taxpayer dollars at a time when we're being told we don't have enough money to get, toothbrushes for the people who are being housed in military detention. Is there going to be some accountability, particularly if the military isn't talking?
There must be, Joy. And, this is a remarkable bit of reporting by Politico. We see that there is good reason for President Trump to use the Stalinist term, the enemy of the people, when referring to the press, because truth is his enemy. It doesn't work to have truth and his lies. And I think in this case, he has the greatest difficulty drawing any line between private gain and public trust. And this brings it to light once again. I commend Chairman Cummings, Chairman Nadler. I hope that they will pursue this very vigorously and promptly. This is not something we can let lie around for additional months. These Air Force officials need to be subpoenaed in. They've had an opportunity to respond. We need to know the facts of how much taxpayer money may be wasted. We know much has already been wasted just in sending so many people to Trump resorts within the United States, but this appears to be now an international issue of tax money wasted, just as Donald Trump has also done plenty of tax dodging, apparently.
And you're a plaintiff, Congressman, in one of these emoluments cases, I should note.
Yes.
The question then becomes, because this isn't just a waste of taxpayer money, there seems to be a pattern of a lot of spending of federal money. He also would like to make that international by making the G7 be hosted at another struggling resort of his in Florida. You've got all of the money the Secret Service is paying every time they have to service him
Indeed.
at one of his resorts. You've got himself staying at his resorts more than 213 times at taxpayer expense. There is a pattern of enrichment of the Trump organization, meaning himself, right?
Yes.
And he didn't
It
divest
actually
of this.
begins, as you know, Joy, just a few blocks down Pennsylvania Avenue from the White House, where one foreign potentate after another stays at the ultra-luxurious Trump International Hotel. That's really part of what started our emoluments lawsuit. And now it's just one thing on top of another. And yes, I believe it's a constitutional violation, and it should form part of the basis of this key impeachment inquiry. We need that inquiry to move forward. The Trump administration thinks that they can avoid this by delay. And whenever we delay on the Democratic side and fail to pursue the public interest, particularly after an investigation like this, we're really just advancing Trump's defense. We need to move forward directly and immediately.
Let me bring Charlie Sykes into this, because Charlie, one thing that I do not understand, you hear supporters of Donald Trump say that they don't care, even if he's taking money from military schools, right, because they're like, well, we need the wall, so to them it's worth it, right? That they don't care what he does and who he takes and steals money from within the government as long as they get the wall. This seems different. This is actually directly putting money in his own pocket and using the military as a cover. Is this going to fly with Trump supporters?
Now, assuming the story holds up, which I think it probably will, and assuming there's not an innocent explanation, this is a genuinely astonishing story that takes the naked graph that we've been seeing to a whole new level. Because what you are having, as you just put it, is you're having the President of the United States taking money from the military, taking money from the troops, taking money from national security, and putting it in his own pocket. That strikes me as a different category than a lot of the other things that we've been talking about. I mean, I don't know that voters in Wisconsin and Michigan are going to be moved by terms like the emoluments clause, but they will understand that here's a president who's wrapped himself in the military and in national security, looting our military, our men and women in uniform, for his own personal benefit. And this comes the 1-2 punch, taking money from the schools, making safe schools for the children of the troops to pay for his wall. I do think this is a really a significant challenge for the president. I think it's going to be a significant challenge even for members of his base who have not moved on any of this stuff before. But also, it's an indication of just how aggressive and open the president has become in his graft, that he feels that he's gotten away with this and with that, and he's become emboldened. But I think this may cross a red line for a lot of voters.
And Congressman Doggett, will this cross a line for the leadership of the House of Representatives? Because this is so open now. This isn't just William Barr throwing a party at his hotel, which is bad enough. Is this going to move the leadership?
I hope so. This is not a time for more timidity, for a tepid approach. And of course, we not only need to move the House leadership, but to find at least one Republican who's not already retired to stop enabling this president. Just as the president has pushed the limits again and again on graft, he has pushed the limits with his Republican enablers. And the more they let him get away with, the more he grabs for power, for personal gain. That's what we've got to bring a stop to in working immediately on this investigation.
And we know that the House Judiciary Committee is preparing to take its first formal vote per Politico to define what Chairman Jerry Nadler says is an ongoing impeachment investigation of Donald Trump, according to multiple sources briefed on discussions. A panel could vote as early as Wednesday on a resolution to spell out the parameters of the investigation. Let me quickly jump to Brian Bender. I know this isn't your story, but any reporting on what the whip count looks like on that?
It's a good question. It's not really something I've been tracking. But, you know, to Charlie's earlier point, I think it's important to say there are unanswered questions about this particular case involving the resort in Scotland. The Air Force has not explained why this decision was made. I talked to a senior Air Force official today who was not aware of this, but I laid out the facts as we were able to uncover them. And his response was, quite frankly, wow, that's really weird. That doesn't sound right. Why would they do this? So the question in my mind is there some message from above that you guys got to start staying at this resort, spending money on Trump properties? Or is it the brass trying to please the president? Either way, it's probably not a good thing. But I do think there's a discussion going on now, and the Pentagon is going to be under a lot more pressure to answer the House committees, which they haven't done in more than 2 months on this particular issue. Very
quickly, Charlie, if they don't answer, if the military continues to stonewall, then what?
Yeah, well, then I think that you need to go to the most aggressive tactics, because again, if there was an innocent explanation for this, and there may be an innocent explanation for this, wouldn't we have heard it by now? And of course, we've seen the way this president operates with the Weather Service. You know, are they on the phones right now telling people in the Air Force you have to put out a statement that this is all completely kosher, that it's all completely okay?
Yeah.
So I think this story is going to play out very, very quickly and may have different layers as the president tries to find a way to get the military in line with what's happening here.
And will they get in line? Very quickly.
I'm going to tell you the explanation that they're going to give you eventually here. The Air Force and the Secretary of Defense are going to say that that crew was being used to evaluate support to the Secret Service in the White House in case the president stays at that site, and that they were just doing a mobility transport assessment, and that it won't happen again.
If the military is willing to do that, then what? Because if they're willing to cover for him, then that's scarier than the NOA covering for him.
Absolutely.
It absolutely is.
That is what it's going to be.
Brian Bender, great reporting. Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate you joining us. Congressman Lloyd Doggett, thank you. Charlie Sykes and Malcolm Nance, thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. Coming up.